Well, the gospel is stronger than you realize. Hey, Pastor Matt here with your Missionary Pathway Mission Insight. And if you find these insights helpful, take an opportunity, click like and subscribe, share it out with somebody else that needs it, and consider being a part of supporting insights like this and free training resources by becoming a Kairos Catalyst. Your financial support makes free training resources and mission insights like this possible. So if you'd like to learn how to become a catalyst, check out thekairosnetwork.com/give and learn more about how you can become a catalyst and the goals that we have as we continue to grow in the mission and ministry that God's given us. So with that in mind, the thought is this: the gospel is stronger than you realize. I was thinking this as I was kind of meditating on having kids. I was watching my son in the backyard and he was literally trying to do backflips on the ground. And I watched as he would run, he would jump and do a flip and land square on his back. That's right. And then I would watch him get up and do it again and again, until finally I just walked out the back door and I said, "You have to stop. You are literally hurting me." And he looked at me and goes, "But we don't have a pad." Now, the reason this story made me think about that is because I remember when we had our firstborn son and that feeling of bringing him home and feeling like he was so fragile and like anything could break him, you know? But then all of a sudden you begin to realize kids are just way more resilient than that. You know, maybe it comes from having a couple kids, or maybe it comes from watching your son try to do front flips in the backyard and landing square on his back. The reality is kids are way more sturdy than we realize. And that always makes me think about the gospel. You know, sometimes we think the gospel is way more fragile than it actually is. Sometimes we think it's so fragile that we're actually trying to protect it so much we're almost afraid to share it. Like the things we do to protect the gospel actually stand in the way of sometimes sharing the gospel. And I think the problem is we're viewing the gospel like I viewed my firstborn son, like he was some really fragile kid, when in reality I learned as he began to grow, this kid is way more resilient than I realized. That's the truth with the gospel. The gospel is stronger than you realize. And when you begin to realize how strong the gospel is, you will spend less time trying to protect it and more time trying to share it. And I think in our world today, we need more people who are focused on sharing the gospel out. So how do we do that? Well, number one, trust in the gospel's power. I think one of the reasons we're afraid to share the gospel out in the world is we're afraid it's this fragile thing, when really it's the most powerful message that mankind has ever known. And it's a message that is powerful and has the power to change the world around you. See, the gospel doesn't need your protection right now as much as it needs you out sharing it and proclaiming it to the people around you in the places you live, work, learn, and play. So rather than say, how do I protect the gospel? Maybe you should start asking, how can I start proclaiming the gospel? Which brings us to our next point. Take some risks in mission. The reality is, like Jesus sending out his disciples way before you'd think they were ready, Jesus trusted in the Spirit to guide them, to protect them on their mission. And we need to trust the same thing. We need to be willing to step out and try some things in mission. Take some healthy missional risks as a church, a ministry, or as individuals, because the reality is, if we don't step out and take a few risks in mission, we're not going to see the gospel proclaimed in the places it needs to be proclaimed, in the world where people are desperate for it, but don't know what it is they're desperate for. Next, don't be afraid to mess it up. I think one of the primary reasons I hear people avoid trying to share their faith is they're afraid they're gonna mess it up. But here's the reality. God can handle the messiness of mission. That's the truth. And the reality is, you might not know all of Scripture, you might not know how everything fits together, but you know something really powerful. You know your story and the impact the gospel has made on your story. And if you're willing to share that with other people around you, well, then that becomes a powerful thing. So don't be afraid to mess it up. Just get out there and share it. And the more you share it, the better you're gonna find you get at sharing it. And then finally, remember that God's gospel is God's work. Ultimately, God protects and advances the gospel, and he is not asking you to share the gospel for him. He's actually inviting you to share the gospel with him. And that's the powerful part of sharing the gospel. If we realize that God, the God of all the universe, the God who created everything, the God who can protect everything, is actually protecting his gospel, then I think we'll feel a little more freedom to be sharing that gospel out in the places it's needed the most, because it's our job to share it boldly, trusting that we are doing that with God, not for God, but with God. And when you start sharing the gospel out, it's going to be amazing to see what God does when the gospel goes out in the world around you, in the places you live, work, learn, and play. Hey, if you'd like help learning how to share the gospel, we've got some great training resources that can help you out. You can check out the Missionary Pathway or one of our Missionary Pathway cohorts. It's an incredible training that we do that helps you learn how to make a disciple and share the gospel in the places you live, work, learn, and play. So I hope this mission insight was helpful for you. If it was, click like, subscribe, share it out with somebody else, consider becoming a catalyst. And until next time, it's a joy hanging out with you right here on Mission Insights.